would like to call to order this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. It is Friday, August 27th, 2021. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll go ahead and begin with the roll. Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Ms. Allard.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Vice Chair, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Dunbar, would you lead us in the land acknowledgement?
Yes, Madam Chair. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cookingland Dena'ina.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So we have 6 items of business today, and there should be copies of the agenda in back. Mr. Vice Chair?
Thank you. I would move to change the order of the day after item 4A to take up items 4C, 4D, 4B, 4F, and then 4E in that order.
Is there a second?
Second. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. The reason we're doing this is Mr. Gates isn't here. There are a number of items that need his attention. And then the last item I'm asking to change the order to speaks for itself. So please support the motion.
Seeking unanimous approval. Is there any objection to changing the order of the day? Seeing no objection, and I'll just pause for folks on the phone. Okay, seeing and hearing no objection, the order of the day has been changed to take up item 4A, 4C, 4D, 4B, 4F, and 4E in that order. We now have before us item 4A, resolution number AR 2021-278, a resolution in honor and remembrance of the victims of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack on our nation, and to declare September 11, 2021 as Day of Honor, Service, and Remembrance, to remember the lives of those lost, pay tribute to those who rose in service, and honor those who continue to serve our country. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
And Madam Clerk, do we need to do a voice vote on these items?
No, Madam Chair, you can do unanimous
Okay, I will
consent.
do that. Okay, so before we move on to a vote, I would like to invite any members who would like to add their names to this resolution. To the
Please add me, Madam Chair.
Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Allard, Mr. Rivera, Ms. Zalatel, Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Perez-Verdia, and Ms. Kennedy.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
thanks.
Okay. Madam Clerk, I feel like we could add everybody and probably the administration as well to this. I can't imagine anyone would object.
Thank you.
I suggest we add Ms. Quinn Davidson as well. Would you?
Mr. France, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we remember the horrible events of almost 20 years ago, Let us never forget how precious our democracy is, especially when there are potential threats to it. I just want to call attention, to the end of the first paragraph. And in response to this tragedy, Americans across the country came together in a remarkable spirit of patriotism and unity and carried out countless acts of kindness, generosity, and compassion. I believe that this speaks volumes to who we are as a people. And I would also encourage folks to participate in the community events marking this anniversary. I know that and Mr. Vice Chair, you may have details. I believe the fire department is hosting the main event for the meeting, and perhaps Ms. Zemboski has details to share. Sorry to put you on the spot. We can share that information later too.
Okay, we'll get to it in just a minute.
We'll share that information with folks later.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Are there any comments by members? Seeing no further comments, seeking unanimous approval. The resolution passes unanimously. We now have item 4C before us, Assembly Memorandum number AM 527-2021, application for the transfer of ownership of restaurant eating place liquor license number 5317 and restaurant designation permit for Muse Restaurant LLC, DBA Muse. Action was postponed from the meeting of August 24, 2021. There is no motion pending. Mr. Weddleton, did you want to begin?
Second.
Oh,
Move to approve.
moved and seconded. Mr. Weddleton?
I just, ownership seemed weird to me, so I talked to one of the board members of the Museum Association and their attorney, Steve Mahoney. They explained that, clearly it makes sense if they have their operator of the thing changed, it would take months to get a license, and that's a hassle, so that the Museum Association will control the license, but a person or trust has to own the license. So they created a trust, which is controlled by the association, and the trust is the only member of an LLC that owns it. So it's a little convoluted, but it's simple enough. I just wanted to know who controls it, and it's the board of the Museum Association.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any other comments from members or questions? Okay, seeing no further members in the queue. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Aller?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Salatel? Yes. Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Villa?
Yes.
And Ms. Quinn Davidson is absent. The resolution is approved 10-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. AM 527-2021 passes 10-0. We now have before us resolution number AR 2021-261S as amended, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with the United States Department of Treasury to accept emergency rental and utility assistance funds and appropriate said funds. Public hearing was closed August 24, 2021. Ms. Zalatel moved to approve. It was seconded by Mr. Weddleton and amended. The motion to approve is on the floor. Ms. Zalatel?
Can I go ahead and move the S1? There's been an S1 superseding the S that was provided on Tuesday night.
So, second.
The S1 version has been moved and seconded.
And Madam Chair, I'm waiting on council. I have two amendments.
Okay, I believe we do need Mr. Gates for the other items as well. So we could
If
take,
I might just briefly.
go ahead.
I can now report that the September 11, 2021 commemoration is the 9/11 Remembrance Alaska Fallen Firefighter Memorial will be taking place on the 20th anniversary of September 11th. The procession will begin at 2:45 to 3 o'clock, 5th Avenue from Denali Street to A Street, and then the memorial ceremony will happen on the corner of 5th and A from 3 to 4 p.m. honoring Alaska's Division of Forestry, Chugiak Fire Department, Anchorage Fire Department, Firefighter Scott W. McLean during the ceremony.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
And Madam Chair, I've been notified that I just want to verify the live stream is working. I've been contacted by a few members of the public that they're not getting on board.
The live stream is working, but I understand the municipality as a whole is having some slow internet issues, so that might be causing the lag.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. Apologies, folks. I'm expecting Mr. Gates to walk through the door momentarily. We'll just... Madam Clerk?
In the meantime, Madam Chair, could Mr. Constant please repeat the information about the 9/11
Absolutely.
event?
I'll try to read it more cogently this time. I'll just read it from the top. Alaska's Fallen Firefighter and 20th Anniversary 9/11 Remembrance. Never forget means never forgetting. Please join the Alaska Fire Service as we celebrate and remember those who gave their lives in the line of duty both in Alaska and 20 years ago in New York City. Saturday, September 11th, 2021, at the Alaska Fallen Firefighter Memorial, 5th Avenue and A Street, downtown Anchorage. Memorial procession, 5th Avenue from Denali Street to A Street, 2:45 to 3 p.m. Memorial ceremony, corner of 5th Avenue and A Street, 3 to 4 p.m. We will be honoring Alaska Division of Forestry, Chugiak Fire Department, and Anchorage Fire Department firefighter Scott W. McLean during the ceremony.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. Ms. Quinn Davidson, are you on the line? Excuse me. Again, thanks for your patience, everybody. We seem to have lost a few more of the attorneys, so I believe we're at a full stop.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we go ahead and speak to the S1 version and then there's the amendments. They're not going to alter the amount for the general document. I mean, they're going to alter the document, but not in fairly substantial ways. So I wanted to speak to the S1. This delay actually was right for fortuitous, because we got new guidance on Wednesday, actually, about these funds. And one of the salient features of the changes is it's now and Mr. Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, 20% spend before the additional monies can be released to the municipality. So this is still for the money that we do have on hand, and as soon as the municipality receives, gets these monies out, receives from the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation that we're at that 20% spend, I totally expect to see another item to appropriate the remaining funds, which is terribly urgent. As many probably heard, the eviction moratorium was struck down yesterday by the U.S. Supreme Court. So this money is more important than ever. So I do think that it's really important that we approve this today. I did bring a couple of amendments which are being passed out now, which are primarily for clarification's sake.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And since, just a note to mention that since we don't have our computer system, just wave your hand if you want to, then you can cue or text me. Ms. Quinn-Davidson, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, Ms. Jones, have the amendments been emailed to the members who are on the phone? Do you know?
Madam Chair, I do not know the answers to that. Jennifer, do you have the electronic versions of these yet?
Yes, I think I just got them, so I can certainly forward them. The team may have already done.
Mr. Gates, have the amendments been forwarded to the 3 members who are on the telephone?
No, I'm sorry, I got right here.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, would you like me to go ahead and move the first, and we can start to talk, and then we can make sure everyone catches up?
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. I move amendment number 1.
Second.
This amendment adds specific language about grantees, our authorized to make additional rent payments to landlords where tenants are facing major barriers to securing a lease. As you all know, we've had a lot of conversation about the barriers to housing, and one of them there are some risks associated with those individuals who may be going directly from homelessness to a place to live. So this is an extra tool at the disposal, and so I thought it was really important to add that to the whereases to say that yes, this is a good tool and one that we hope is utilized in furtherance of our work toward ensuring we've provided toward our work at the housing surge.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Weddleton?
So, what would this be additional rent? I mean, are you saying? They would pay, the landlord's looking for $1,000 a month and then pay $1,200.
It's brand new, and so I think this provides some flexibility to do an additional. Maybe it's an additional security deposit for a whole. I think this coupled with the landlord liaison program, in addition to the risk pool that's available, can really help give landlords that peace of mind that should there be damages in excess of the damage deposit that they can maybe take a little bit bigger risk once in place.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any further questions or comments on the amendment? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1 to AR 2021-261S1. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Auer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaBrant?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Zalatel?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Padilla?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Yes.
The motion to amend passes 11-0.
Madam Clerk. Ms. Alato?
Yes, I would move amendment number 2, please. Second.
Moved and seconded.
This is just a conforming amendment to ensure that the entire document reads American Rescue Plan Act. We made some of those changes on Tuesday night, but there was still one more place in section 1A.
Any discussion or questions? Seeing no one in the queue, members may proceed to vote. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote on amendment number 2 to AR 2021-261S1?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddle?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Salato?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez Revere?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have the main motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on AR 2021-261S1 as amended. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddle?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Salato?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez Revere?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
The motion to approve as amended passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have before us item 4B, resolution number AR 2021-280, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly conditionally approving the renewals of municipal marijuana licenses for continued operation under the current license and authorizing the municipal clerk to take certain action. What is the will of the body?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ms. Honest, would you like to speak to this item?
Through the chair, this AR was drafted so that the applications that were submitted July 1st or later that have completed all required inspections and reviews successfully are allowed to continue operating on September 1st. The municipal marijuana licenses expire midnight August 31st, and without the assembly allowing them to continue operating under their current licenses, they would have to cease operations until they were able to deal with the assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Honest. Do members have, Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So will there be any current operations that they're currently operating that didn't reapply and that aren't on this list?
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, there were 5 establishments that did not submit renewal applications, 4 of which let the clerk's office know that they did not intend to renew. 1 is letting her license expire, and she's applying for a new license at a different location. And I do currently have 2 applications that were turned in August 25th and are still under review. They have some protests from the reviewing departments. So these 2 are still pending, and because they have not completed successfully, are not on this AR. These 2 establishments would have to cease operations on September 1st. And it's 1 establishment that holds 2 licenses.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Ms. Honest.
So can I ask Mr. Gates a question?
I think actually first, Ms. Honest, you had,
Yes, through the chair, and there is 1 establishment that just missed the deadline of being put on this AR. They have completed all inspections and reviews clerk's office has prepared a floor amendment, but we were waiting to get confirmation from Mr. Gates about procedure for this. Arctic Earth has since completed everything, and the clerk's office prepared the floor amendment to propose adding them to this AR.
Mr. Constant?
Mr. Gates, is it proper to add one license to this AR according to your legal analysis?
Yes, I think it is.
Then I would move that amendment.
Second.
Moved and seconded. The amendment is being distributed, and then we'll read it. And can you get it to the folks in the phone too? Thanks.
So the purpose of the amendment is to include municipal marijuana facility license renewal application with associated supporting documents for Ferguson and Smith Enterprises DBA Arctic Earth, the cultivation license M10107. And it simply, on page 1, line 16, adds, whereas the municipal clerk received untimely municipal applications for the renewal of municipal marijuana establishment licenses, etc. Down to the bottom there, it adds Arctic Earth on the M10107.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Do members have any questions or comments? And members on the phone, I just want to confirm that you were able to hear clearly the amendment being read. I understand it's being, or may have already been emailed to you, and I want to check if you have any questions.
No questions.
I'm good, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, I'm good.
Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to AR 2021-280. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Eller?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Soliton?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Fred Padilla?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have the main motion for AR 2021-280 as amended before us. Are there any other comments or questions? Seeing no one else in the queue, members may proceed to vote on AR 2021-280 as amended. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Aller?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Soliton? Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Fred Padilla?
Yes.
Ms. P. Davidson?
Yes.
The motion to approve as amended passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have before us item 4F, resolution number AR 2021-281, a resolution reappropriating $200,000 from the area-wide general capital improvement projects fund 401-800 previously appropriated for property acquisition by AO 2020-99 as amended, and reappropriating to maintenance and operations in order to procure services from engineering companies already under contract with the municipality of Anchorage to obtain cost estimates of potential sites being considered for mass care in a navigation center in Anchorage that would meet the winter 2021 to 2022 homeless requirements. Thank you. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yep, I just would, if I might,
Mr. Constant?
just speak to the fact that this is the first work product of the legislative working group that's been in collaboration with the administration and the facilitators to identify the path forward on two important questions: what's to be done with mass care this year and the long-term program for addressing comprehensive issues related to homelessness in the municipality going forward. And I would just note that this is introduced and sponsored by myself, Mr. Middleton, and significant in its demonstration of collaborative approach.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not a sponsor on this, and I wanted to indicate why, and that's because I don't have a very good idea of the scope of what this money will be used for. What's the timeline in which we can expect the product delivered? What exactly, how many sites will be evaluated? Is this enough money to do it in a short time? I just don't know enough. So if there's either more information, or if there's a way in which we could limit this item to getting a scope, and then authorizing us to scope it through, I would feel it's more comfortable.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Did you want the administration to speak to the scope
Any of the sponsors would be
or
good.
any of the, Mr. Weddleton?
You know, I could touch on that, is we don't really know the scope, we continue to meet, so we don't know which locations or buildings would be evaluated, and that makes a big difference on how much it costs to evaluate, to pay someone to do it, so we'll know more before next week, but, you know, this is a time sensitive issue, we're still on some of the keys, we need to get going, so hopefully it's plenty to do the work, and if not, we'll come back to more. We need to have some knowledge pretty quickly about it, so we can, get the current contractor on it.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I have Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Constant next in the queue. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just double checking on getting something in the whereases. So I assume because it's such short notice that you aren't planning an RFP, it's going to be a sole source. Who is going to be selected for this? And how are they going to be selected?
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. So it's a term contract. We've already approved a contract with a number of engineering contractors that are working for us on a variety of projects. So we would utilize already approved contractors, and it just would depend on which one has the right fit, which one has the right staffing levels to achieve the real-time cost analysis that we need. So we're not going out, we already have them, we just don't have funds for them.
Okay. And will that come back to us, or is this the only chance we have to go with that? That is, you go to the term contract, does that portion of the term contract come back to us to approve or not?
Mr. Constant?
I see Mr. Weddleton with his hand up.
I think the term contracts exist,
Right.
we always have somebody, I think there's at least 3 that are pre-approved to do project management and all kinds of engineering type work. So those already exist, we've already approved those as part of the budget. I think it's part of the budget. But earlier. I think anything that comes out of this, I mean, we'll figure out this weekend a short list to evaluate, and that's something that's going to be doing back to the project. So, operating good.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar, did you have anything else?
No, I think that's good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, I have Ms. Allard and then Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Allard?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's time to move forward. We're here, we need to do this, and this administration has been asking all of these things in active since you guys are part of the discussion, or does Mr. Campbell?
No, I would just say the administration recommends approval.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr.
Allard.
Constant, Mr. Wyman.
Thank you, Mr. Boston. Ms. Zalatel?
Yes, I move to amend on line 6, page 3, where it says construction cost estimates delivered no later than September 14, 2021 for alternative mass care navigation sites.
Second.
And Ms. Zalatel, would you repeat your amendment again, please?
Yes, Madam
Which has
Chair.
been moved and seconded.
Page 3, line 6, under section 1, where it reads, management engineering, procure construction cost estimates delivered no later than 9/14/2021 for alternative mass care navigation sites. Thank you for the comment. Can I speak to that?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Zalatel.
Sure. This aligns the cost estimate that we consider that there's an RFP out right now for mass care. The idea is that a new contractor should probably be in place by 9/15. It would be good, I mean, our current RFP is not location specific, but it would be really good to have this information as we're considering the new contract, for mass care, and who that provider may be, it would probably provide much needed context. Now, it may not be a full cost estimate at that point, but whatever we have, I'd really like to come back before the body, to provide that necessary context, and then also any other potential appropriations that may be needed to finish the work.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. And I just want to pause to make sure, Madam Clerk, did you get the full text of the amendment?
I did not, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for asking. And Ms. Alatel has it in writing for us. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, this is Austin. Could you have it read aloud once more? I couldn't hear a piece of it.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
On page 3, section 1, line 6, to procure construction cost estimates delivered by September 14, 2021 for alternative mass care and navigation center sites.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Weddleton?
I believe this matches the intent. I mean, it's incredibly fast to get what we're asking the contractor to do, but we are focused on that date. But I don't know if we have anyone who's knowledgeable. Is that realistic? And what if we did it on the 20th or something like that? I don't want to say we're just cut off. We're really just giving them 17 days to do this. If it looks like till Monday, it can be incredibly fast. They won't have a list of things to look at until Monday. So,
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
I would like to move to amend slightly so that it would read estimates reported on by September 14th and delivered by October 1st. Because we have 2 questions and we're slightly behind, and so 2 weeks additional, I think, will be enough for us to get everything wrapped up. So then it takes care of the issue of having a report by the contractor on the 14th, but then it allows us time to finalize the delivery.
And that was moved by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Allard, thirded by Ms. Kennedy. And any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Ms. Alatel, is that yours?
Yes, so I just wanted some clarification. What would be the produced item then by the 14th? Because that's the date that we're going to be asked at that meeting to likely include additional funds for mass care. And I really like the context of potential locations on the table.
Mr. Constant?
All I can say is we've been working at a breakneck pace and we've been making progress, but I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. I would rather under-promise and over-deliver. And so 2 weeks more time, I think, will get us. But by the 14th, we should have a good sense. And hopefully we've answered question number 1, the mass care question by then. But your motion talks about both the navigation center and the mass care, which may or may not be the same. And so I'm afraid that question we haven't even breached yet in terms of the negotiations. So I'm just concerned that we need a little bit more time. So what the report would be everything that the group that's in the negotiating process and the collaborative process has worked with the cost analysis for them to bring forward as a report.
I would be comfortable with this amendment if it was that what's we've delivered for 914 is related to mass care and mass care only. I understand the longer term question and I agree. And there may be some overlap and I acknowledge that I'm part of this facilitation group as well. I just want to really narrow in because we do have some big decisions to make about the continuation of mass care on the 14th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Mr. Constant, did you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I would just add that this amount of money is for both of the questions before us. And so I don't anticipate that for the first question we would exhaust all of these funds. But, and in fact, I think that we'll get pretty far on the second question. But by the 14th, yes, I agree, we need to have a very strong handle on what the plan is going forward for that shelter. And so that's, I think, generally, I think that would be good for everyone. I don't have objections. I would ask if there's an objection to that, but that's really the plan. We did receive a communication today from Brother Francis Cancer Shelter and Catholic Social Services, interestingly, that raised a question about the timeline for the solicitation for the operator for mass care, and I recommend everyone reads that email because it raises a couple of good points that we should be considering, and we will. I asked the clerk to print them for our meetings coming up, so yes.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, members of the committee, are we trying to reduce the number of sites down to the top 3 or top 5, or do you even know that at this point?
Is there a member who'd like, Mr. Weddleton?
Yes. We're working on that right now, and we'll have goes that'll eliminate a huge number of those, many, 30 plus lists. And then we'll get to the point where the kind of more clear possibilities, get a quick cost on those, and what do we think? And we're not going to get it precise, these are estimates, but it should be able to help us guide us to knock a couple of those off the list and get us to the preferred 1 or 2 or 3 locations or something. So that's what this is intended for. So we've got at least that element in play as we move forward.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Weddleton, and Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So we are still seeking input from the members through the clerk's office. If you look at what we presented on Wednesday, there were lots of questions on what criteria we should be using for reducing that list down to a functional list. And the funding, ultimately, this funding will help with what I continue to call real-time cost analysis, because as we sit in the room, we don't have construction people, we don't have program project management people, so every number we put forward is like the best guess of someone who has no idea in the business. And so this gives us an independent third party who the municipality is already screened in and we trust to give us, as we go, numbers, and we can come back with an analysis that's based on facts and not just our opinions.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar?
So this, the way that this resolution is for both mass care and navigation center sites, but at that work session, my understanding is that mass care, for obvious reasons, is the winter mass care is the more pressing issue. And so when you, Mr. Weddleton, speak of you want to limit it to a few sites by Monday, is that a few sites for mass care and a few sites for navigation center? Because to me they seem very different. So for example, the Sullivan Arena, we all agree will never be used for a navigation center, but it probably is the most likely site for mass care at this point. It's literally the mass care site. So how is that going to work, and what role will these folks play in differentiating between those two?
Well, the thing is, we separated out the leading issue. We got to get something wrong with it. But it could be that whatever we choose for that is also going to be in the long-term shelter too. That's also a possibility. And I would not say Sullivan or any other location. There are navigation services at Sullivan.
Right.
So it's not, I mean, it is I wouldn't call it a navigation center because it certainly needs more, but there are good things going on to navigate people out of shelter.
Can I follow up to that?
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
Well, my understanding is when you talk about navigation center sites, that you're talking about permanent long-term sites. And I assume, perhaps I'm wrong, that the working group is not considering the Sullivan's a permanent long-term site. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's probably an underlying assumption, but I don't know that we specifically stated that. You know, right now we have all those 30 plus locations on the list, and we will read through them tomorrow. But I think it's a safe bet that that's not a long-term solution.
So when you talk about the 3 sites, again, are you talking about 3 sites for mass care or 3 sites for navigation, or are you combining the 2?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, if we find a site that could be ready quickly before the snow flies or gets cold, and also could be used long-term, then you have one site that we both. Where that can't happen, where something that is available now and there's nothing that would be good long-term, then it's separate. So we don't really know right now. And I don't want to be pinned to 3 sites. It could be one and then the other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Next, we have Ms. Allard and then Ms. Allard. Ms. Allard?
Yeah, thank you. John, in regards to the mass site, we're talking about the Sullivan Arena, but there was security issues and safety issues. So when you refer to perhaps the last site or even short term still staying at the Sullivan Arena, there have been assaults and there has been sexual assaults. It's alarming. The way that the Sullivan Arena is set up, they can't secure the environment properly for those. So I want you guys to really consider that that is not a safe environment for anybody to continue to be serviced.
Yeah, I mean, we're aware, I mean, that's, you know, it has many downsides, no question. It's super expensive, there's lots of downsides to it.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Allard? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to address Mr. Dunbar's question a little bit. I mean, I view it as, you know, you can put all of the potential locations for massacre in one circle and all the potential locations that may look for long-term in the single one might be overlap, but one doesn't preclude the other. You know, we agree that like massacre is the first and more immediate, and that's why, you know, my original amendment was to ensure that we had that information as we look to who that operator may be coming up and ask for to do an additional appropriation to continue massacre on our meeting at September 14th.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment on AR 2021-281? Okay, seeing no further members
I'm
in...
sorry,
Oh,
are we on Mr. Constant's amendment superseded? Mrs. Oliver?
Yes, yours, Mr. Constant's amendment amends Ms. Zalatel's amendment to change the date or adds the language to report by September 14th and delivered on October 1st. Is that correct, Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Any further questions? Comments? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment on AR 2021-281. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please, on the amendment to the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Zalatel?
No.
Mr. Dunbar?
No.
Mr. Perez Revere?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davis?
Yes.
The amendment to the amendment passes 9-2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Madam Chair, do we need to extend the meeting?
We are noticed till 1,
Oh, we don't
actually.
need one.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. We are now back on the amendment as amended, the amendment to AR 2021-281 as amended. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to AR 2021-281. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Zalatel?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez Revere?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davis?
Yes.
The amendment passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We are now back on the main motion to approve AR 2021-281 as amended. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote to approve AR 2021-281 as amended. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the roll, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Ms. Zalatel?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez Revere?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davis?
Yes.
The motion to approve as amended passes 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Madam Chair, I move immediate reconsideration and urgent no vote. This is a very time-sensitive matter, and if we don't, it can't be issued until Monday, but it could be issued today if we take this matter up, reconsider it, and vote no right now.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded.
She should have time.
Any discussion?
Okay, I'll look.
Okay, seeing no discussion, members may proceed to vote on the motion to reconsider item 2021-281. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Madam
As
Chair.
amended.
Mr. Weddleton?
No.
Ms. Allen?
No.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Ms. LaFrance?
No.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Ms. Salazar? No. Mr. Dunbar?
No.
Mr. Perez Revilla?
No.
Ms. McGinnis?
No.
The amendment fails, or the motion to reconsider fails 11-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have before us item 4E, resolution number AR 2021-279, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly acknowledging the municipal clerk's office certification of recall petition 2020-5 as sufficient in setting special election. Before I ask for a motion, it is self-evident that Ms. Zalatel has a conflict and is thereby recused from this item. What is the will of the body? Moved and seconded. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question, perhaps a follow-up or two, and then I will be making a motion.
Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you.
And do we need to have Ms. McConnell? Oh, you're right here. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess to the clerk, as members have received, over the last 48 hours or so, we received a lot of emails requesting us to move this election up from the currently November 2nd to November 9th to November 12th, or excuse me, October 12th or October 19th. Of those two possibilities, October 12th or October 19th, and I apologize if this is a loaded question, which of those do you think the elections team would be able to run a better election for, given the circumstances of the Juneau election as well as the tight time?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, neither of those dates are acceptable for a variety of reasons. First of all, the elections team has contracted with the city and borough of Juneau to run their vote-by-mail election as this body asked us to do. And I believe that election is on October 6th, October 5th. And so Juneau certifies their election, I believe, on October 19th. And so we will have Juneau ballots in the room on October 12th and 19th. We will be processing Juneau envelopes and ballots, verifying signatures. Neither of those dates, October 12th or 19th, are ideal.
Thank you. So, like I said, Madam Chair, just one or two follow-ups.
Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
So I respect that neither October 12th or 19th are ideal. But is there going to be a point, perhaps on the 19th, where you're counting much fewer ballots regarding the Juneau election, and you might have a little bit more free time to do this recall election, special election?
Through the chair, Mr. Rivera, I understand that there is an election day, but as we all know, with early voting or absentee voting, the election really happens much earlier. So even if you did select October 19th, 21 days before October 19th to mail the ballots is right in the middle of the Juneau election. We would be doing logic and accuracy testing on Anchorage ballots as well as processing Juneau ballots. It's more complicated and riskier to have two elections going at the same time. Even if you did it on October 19th, you would, because of the prep work, you would still be doing two elections at the same time.
Thank you. I guess just one last follow-up, and then I will be making a motion. So, are there things that you can do to minimize the risk?
Through the chair, there probably are some things that we can do to minimize the risk. I think we need more staff. I think that is difficult. We have been struggling with staff during COVID. That would be one issue. We probably need to limit the number of observers in the room because it's going to be difficult if we're doing Juneau and Anchorage and have observers trying to observe everything. If Juneau has observers and Anchorage has observers, that's going to be very difficult. We may have some increased contract costs. We may have those anyway. But if you shorten these timelines for our vendors, I also think that Erica may have a deadline that I'm not sure that our vendors can even meet the October 19th deadline. We could meet an October 26th deadline by getting the ballot faces. That means the actual ballot with the content on the ballot. The deadline is September 1st to get that to our printer, but that doesn't give us time. That means between today and September 1st, we have to design the ballot. We have a different vendor that does the design. It's fairly routine ballot. The question is posed in this document. There would be a statement from the member to be recalled. That is the only thing that would need to be added, but there does need to be some time to do that. And so I will tell you, Mr. Rivera, October 26th is doable. I think the risk of trying to get our design vendor on board and our printing and mailing vendor on board, right now, we don't have their permission or approval to do that. So those are some of the risks. I think I've talked to the Assembly, and I apologize for being a little long-winded here, but I have talked to the Assembly at least since January that the clerk staff is fully utilized. This is going to fall primarily on the management staff. It's me, Erica, Jennifer, and Desiree. I told you before, we are not an unlimited resource. There are pressures that puts on us. And again, my biggest concern, I believe that the clerk's office has produced positively deviant results for you. We do incredible work, but this is one of those things that puts pressure on us. And I worry very much, especially about an election, that we could fail, and those are the risks that I am concerned about.
Thank you. So I am ready for the motion then. So I see that an amendment was passed around that was very similar to the motion that I was going to make. So I'll go ahead and just move amendment number 1. So you guys speak to it.
Moved and seconded. Go ahead, Mr. Rivera. And let me just pause 1 second. Do members on the phone have amendment number 1?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I absolutely agree that the elections team and the clerk staff does an amazing job with the resources that you have. So I am putting forward, or have made the motion to put forward this amendment because on this body, I think I am somewhat of an expert on recalls. And I can tell you three things. One, that my constituents in Midtown are tired of elections, and they would like this election to happen sooner rather than later. Two, that both, this is not a sort of a one side wants it sooner rather than later, and the other side would prefer it in November. All sides on this issue want it sooner rather than later, and I think we have seen emails to that effect. And three, I think Midtown deserves to have two representatives who are fully focused on the job, and having this election sooner rather than later will allow that to happen. So I hope we can approve this amendment and do everything that we can within our powers to mitigate the risks that the clerk's office presented.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. So I have Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Peterson, and Ms. Allard in the queue. We've got an amendment before us, but I recognize that the amendment and the main motion raise pretty much the same issue. So Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, I got a couple questions for Barbara. So, likely, I guess there were about 10,000 votes in the regular election for District 4. And I just calculated 2,500 were needed to do the recall, and that was a quarter of the vote. So it's not a citywide. So is it possible the ballots just get mailed and just get set aside? You do Gino, as soon as Gino's or as soon as counted, then you pull out the ballots for this recall and then count those? I mean, we'll have to do it constantly like we do with the citywide.
Through the chair, I think that we could have the. It's just complicated. I think that the belief that there is just an election where the ballots are mailed and they're returned. I know that all of you have been at the election center, and we have a process that begins every single day. And so remember, with our voters, we're going to mail the ballots out. We have to scan the ballots as soon as they come in. So if you pick October 19th, that means that the ballots are going to be mailed on September 27th. All right? So people could begin voting as soon as that. The code says that we're to send cure letters within 3 days. So we're going to be processing Juneau's election and processing Anchorage's election. We have a duty to send those cure letters within the same period of time. So I'm just letting you know there's no setting one aside. So I hope that answers your question. It's just one example.
That's not what I wanted to hear.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I guess I'll wait till just broadly. I'd like to just get it done and do it early. But on the other hand, we know it's got to be done well. We saw the previous election, all the observers that were there, huge interest in watching every little step. And if we've got two going on at once, I just can't imagine. I mean, that stuff that went on at the mayoral election, that's competing too. I don't think we can have that order.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. So next, Mr. Peterson, then Ms. Allard, then Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did not get an opportunity to consult with Ms. Jones about this ahead of time. And Mr. Gates and I were on the phone right before I drove in here trying to decide what date to put on this amendment. And it does sound to me like October 19th is not a reasonable expectation for us to pull this election off because of the printing and the vendors and that situation. So I would ask Ms. Jones, if you were the one writing this amendment, what date would you have chosen?
Jones.
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, I actually participated in writing the AR and we proposed November 9th. However, I acknowledge this is not my decision. It is your decision. I am letting you know that, it's going to be difficult. I think we may be more successful on October 26th. We still have issues on October 26th. However, if you want to move it from November 9th, I think October 26th has less risk.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And actually, Mr. Yates, did you want to comment? Here?
I just wanted to mention, thank you, Madam Chair, that the state statute that has the recall election requirements, it specifically set out 30-day window for statutory election day, the 45 days after the approval resolution to not more than 75 days. And for comparison purposes, our charter also has for referendum election to have it not more than 75 days after petition certified for referendum election. I think there's some really good window here that we should take into consideration. So the Assembly's responsibility is to ensure integrity of elections, and you put the clerk speaks to that repeatedly. I think the main purpose of this window and this time frame is so that the body can decide within this window is reasonable and most best way to protect the integrity of the election process. So I just wanted to make sure you understood the statute and its purpose and why you have that range of dates. Maybe soon we make more sense we have I can go to election in push the 75-day mark. That is good.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. To go back to the queue, Ms. Aller.
Thank you. First, I'll say a couple of things. Thank you, Ms. Jones. I know this is difficult for everybody, but Mr. Gates did bring up the election integrity. You've also brought up that you've already put forth a date of 9 November. And so I would like to amend the amendment to reflect 9 November. He put in for the 19th of October.
Second.
When I say he, Mr. Rivera. A couple of the reasons is our clerk's office is going to be having a major election in June. And we have a contract with that. And it worries me if one ballot, just one, comes in and gets intertwined with June's. That's enough to risk the entire election for Juneau and for Anchorage. So I want folks to realize that we've seen what's happened in past elections, how it's so stressful for our clerk's office because of the staff is limited staffing. And like Ms. Jones said, we don't have unlimited staffing. So I'd like to support the clerk's office in their initial decision and recommendation for the 9th of November. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aller. Let's see. One moment. Okay, so the amendment to the amendment has been moved and seconded and spoken to. Ms. Kennedy, did you want to speak to the amendment to the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak to it since it's been brought up and I seconded it. I actually I wasn't going to have a problem really with working with the 19th. However, that was before I heard Ms. Jones' explanation of what was going on, and I totally didn't even think about the fact that we could be handling Juneau's elections again. So that, to me, presents an entirely different ballgame. And I know we have significant undercurrents a lot of times in this community about the integrity of elections, and we certainly don't want to give people more to complain about. So I think we do have to move the election into a different month. I mean, the idea of having one election a month is probably enough for the clerk's office to handle. So I'll support this November 9th date. I would have been happy with the 2nd as well, but just having them in different months, I think, would really serve everyone a whole lot better than trying to stack two on top of each other. So I'll support this amendment, or to the amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to vote no on this amendment to the amendment. With all due respect to my colleagues from Trinity IQ River, my constituents are making a fairly clear request that we move this election up. So, and this is going to be a special election for my constituents. So I would ask that we vote no on this amendment to the amendment, and if one of my colleagues wishes to put forward the latter date, October 26th or whatever that date was, which Ms. Jones did state that on the record that she could do an election at that date with much less risk, then I would not necessarily be supportive of that, but I would be okay with it.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Allard, and then I put myself in the queue.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate what Ms. Jones said, less risk, and that there is still risk, and we are at an election integrity. Understand that it is District 4's representatives that we're speaking about, but I also know that there are other folks that believe in keeping the election integrity intact, and I think we should support the clerk's original thought of the 9th of November. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Actually, we'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I heard from the clerk was that it would certainly be more convenient to do this another time, but I think Mr. Rivera's point is well taken. We have a whole district who's already been through another recall election, wants to get a move on, wants to know whether that person's representing them or not. I think it's also fair to the person in the seat serving to know whether they're continuing that role or not, sooner rather than later. And I did hear Ms. Jones say that even though it's not perfect or convenient, it's doable. And I want to say two things about that. One is that to already have numbers raising and suggesting that there might be a lack of integrity in this election, I think is intentional to plant that idea, and I think that's really inappropriate. So I would ask that they please not jump to that conclusion and instead offer up solutions. I think the solution here is to tell Ms. Jones that if she needs more funding to accomplish these goals, if she needs to hire contracted folks to get this election done early, which is the request of all the people, I think every email we've received, I commit to making that happen and to supporting Ms. Jones in doing that. So I think that's the solution rather than already starting to lay the groundwork to complain that there was a problem with however this election turns out. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And Ms. Kennedy has a question, and then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is in the contract that we have with Juneau. I know if I were a Juneau resident thinking that we might be deciding to have an election on top of their election, I might be concerned more so than the Anchorage election on top of the Juneau election. But anyway, my question is in regards to the contract and whether or not there's anything in the contract that says that the municipal clerk's office is solely handling the Juneau election for a certain period of time, or if there's anything in the contract that allows for multiple elections to be held simultaneously. Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Through the chair, no. Nothing in the MOU with Juneau limits the municipality's use of the election center or of the equipment that we own. As I'm sure you know, the MOU with Juneau makes it very clear that the clerk in Juneau is responsible for the Juneau election. The municipal clerk's office is as the assembly requested, allowing Juno to use our equipment and our facility, and we have them using some of our staff. But nothing in that MOU with Juno restricts us from using our election center and equipment.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering if Ms. Jones could educate us on the differences between the ballots that will be coming in from the Juno election versus the ones that we will be mailing out for this recall election, and how our machine can differentiate between those two. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, the ballot design of the ballots, as you all know, it has these little black marks around the outside of your ballot. Those are called timing marks. The timing marks affect how the ballot is read by the tabulation machine. The timing marks for our ballot would be different than the timing marks on the Juno ballot. It is very unlikely, from my understanding of how the system works, that a Juno ballot could be scanned. I anticipate it would be rejected. If any of you have been down to the election center and watched us scan ballots, you'll see that when we're scanning, ballots are rejected. Typically, they're rejected because they're bent, they're torn, there's something on the timing marks that's not working. And then we set those aside and they're facsimilated or duplicated. So that would be something we would, in fact, during the regular election and the runoff election, we also make sure that those ballots are different. And yes, we did get regular election ballots during the runoff election. But my understanding is that the machine would not process both. I still think that there's the envelopes are also different, so that's another important thing. Juno's envelopes are blue and green. They're very beautiful. Ours are blue and gold. And so there are some systems set up to protect from that. However, I'm still going to tell you there's still some risk, that an envelope gets in the wrong group or a ballot gets in the wrong group. It's not going to count, but it still is a risk.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Any follow-up?
I was actually going to make a motion to amend the amendment and change the date to October 26th.
Actually, Mr. Peterson, the amendment has already been amended,
Okay, we'll have to vote on that.
so we'll have to deal with that one first.
Okay.
Ms. Allard?
Yeah, I just have one question, Ms. Jones. Have we ever done 2 elections at the same time, one city and then our city?
Through the chair, no. We've done the regular election and the runoff election, and then we also, I believe, one year we had an election and a concurrent election. So we, I believe that was the TAPSA, if anybody remembers when we did the TAPSA. So that was, but we put those on the same ballot. So, but one was a regular election and one was a concurrent election. So they just had different dates.
So then we have risk running 2 elections from different cities, and we've never done this before in history that you're aware of.
That is correct. There's a risk.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Mr. Rivera?
Thanks. Just one quick question. So, Madam Clerk, is there any election that you run which there is absolutely 0 risk?
No, Mr. Rivera, they all have a great deal of risk.
Great, thank you.
Mr. France, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, thanks to everybody for the thoughtful discussion as we seek to balance the protection of the integrity of the election with what I believe is the people's right to a speedy election. In this case, we've heard all around from not just Midtown, but other folks. I think it's really is a positive thing that we have this contract with Juno, but on the other hand, it's very concerning to me that it's standing in the way of us putting our own Anchorage residents first. And so I'm not going to support this amendment that puts forward the date of November 9th because the clerk has said that October 26th is doable, and that, as has been mentioned, there is no election without any risk. And I also want to go on the record saying I support and encourage and advocate whatever staffing you need to protect the integrity of the election and maintain the level of the clerk's office to successfully execute the other duties, as well as increase security, whatever personnel is needed at Election Center to ensure that everything goes smoothly. So I urge a no vote to the amendment to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
Mrs. Allard?
May I amend the amendment?
There's already two amendments on the floor.
Who withdrawing?
I'm going to withdraw the amendment, amend the amendment to the 26th.
If the seconder agrees.
If the seconder agrees.
Ms. Kennedy, do you agree to withdraw? Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Chris. You're still.
Ms. Kennedy, do you agree?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right now, I'm going to hand this back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
You gotta make sure to grab that back quickly.
That wasn't it.
It's not the amendment.
Okay, so the amendment to the amendment, bear with me, folks, has been withdrawn by the mover and the seconder. So we have before us the original amendment to change the date to October 19th. Did I hear another amendment?
To the 26th of October.
So Ms. Allard, you're moving to amend the amendment to the date of October 26th.
I'll second
And
that.
Mr. Peterson has seconded. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will be voting no on this amendment for reasons I've previously stated, but I will encourage my colleagues to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Ms. Kennedy?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. That was an interesting comment from Mr. Rivera. But my question right now, though, is do we know exactly the situation with the vendor? Because that was also one of the concerns, was whether or not the vendor could keep up with all the things that needed to be done for the different elections. So maybe Ms. Jones can respond to whether or not the 26th will actually work. Thank you.
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, Deputy Clerk Erica McConnell did some calculations and contacted all of our vendors. And we need to get the ballot faces to our printing vendor on September 1st. And that would give us from now until September 1st to design the ballot. So yes, we can make the deadline for October 26th.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any follow-up, Ms. Kennedy?
No, thank you. That was my only question. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is our vendors, do we have similar vendors with the Juneau elections? So do we know that?
Through the chair, Juneau uses the same vendor for tabulation because they have to have their own contract for that. So yes. And then for our mail sorting and signature verification system, we just do that for Juneau. So they use entirely our system for that.
If I could follow up.
Go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
What about the printer?
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Peterson, they use the same printer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Is there any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment of AR 2021-279 to change the date to October 26th, 2021? Seeing no one else in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
No.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
That passes 8-2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have the amendment to AR 2021-279 before us, which changes the date to October 26th. Is there any, 2021, is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to AR 2021-279. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
Motion passed. The amendment passes 10-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now have the main motion to approve resolution number AR 2021-279 as amended before us. Mr. Weddleton and then Mr. Gates.
Can you give us a rough order of magnitude of cost?
Through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, we anticipate that a special election costs approximately $100,000.
And where does that money come from?
Well, I anticipate we're going to probably be coming back to you for an appropriation after the election is over. Currently, we have money in both the clerk's office and the election budget and the assembly budget. So we'll be able to make expenditures now. You're taking money out of one pocket instead of the other. And then as we get closer to the end of the year, then we may need to ask you to appropriate additional money for that.
Go ahead, Mr.
So,
Weddleton.
It's frustrating to me that one district, a small group of people in one district, got upset and we've done 2 recalls, and then all of Anchorage has to pay for this. And if there's any way to pull money to pay for this from a road project, a playground, or something in that district, and not for the rest of Anchorage, that's what I want to see. Anchorage is not, it's a small group of people in one district.
You gotta give up a bus.
Give up a bus.
Give up transportation feelings.
Want to go outside?
Dean and you. Okay, so before I go to Mr. Rivera, Mr. Gates, you asked me.
I can't wait to this topic.
Mr. Rivera?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And while I appreciate the comments by my colleague from South Anchorage, you are right that there are certain constituents that are upset in Midtown, but there are also certain constituents that are upset all over the city. And Midtown isn't going to be the only, well, we will see, but Midtown might not be the only district that faces a recall that gets on the ballot. So while I appreciate that, Midtown has cost the taxpayers of the municipality all around some amount of dollars. This is, I think, the cost of doing business as elected officials. It's unfortunate, and until the state changes their laws so that this isn't as ridiculous as it is right now, it's the cost of doing business.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. We'll go back to Mr. Gates.
On this topic,
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to remind everybody that we need another amendment and let Ms. Wood 2020 resolved. and I'll title to this resolution. I think it's advisable to their final document is distributed conforms to the recent amendment. So we should replace the words in the title November 2nd or November 9th towards the October 26th.
Thank you, Mr. Gates.
Madam Chair, would you mind repeating that? I couldn't hear Mr. Gates.
Yes, sorry, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I'll try to speak up. I suggest that the body have an amendment to the title to conform to the recent amendment, change the date to October 26th. So that should be reflected in the title of the final document that's distributed as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gates.
I'll move such an amendment if you like an option.
Okay, moved and seconded, and again, this amendment is to change line 3 to conform it to the amendment with the date of October 26, 2021. Any discussion on this amendment? No, okay. Seeing no discussion, members may proceed to vote. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote on this amendment to AR number 2021-279?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Presberdia? Mr. Presberdia?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
That passes 10-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, so just on the queue, I know we've got Mr. Constant and Ms. Allard. Was there anyone else? We went back and forth on a couple different topics there, and I don't want to miss anybody. Okay, we'll go to you.
I'm going back to the funding question. I want to explore the idea, and this is something we should take up after, of course, this is all settled, but I don't know that I'm exactly opposed to directing the cost of a recall to a location, but I wouldn't want to do it by taking away a benefit or a project or a park. And so I would like us to explore the question of a special levy, meaning in the language of the ballot question it says, the recall of blah, 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 this will be paid for by a special tax levy of your district. And in so doing, make it a cost of the recall so that the signers understand that they have to pay for it. And I also have the question that I sent to Mr. Gates for consultation, but I'll just bring it up now, that I wonder if these expenses shouldn't be outside of the cap, because you can't budget for a special election. And so these are big questions that I don't think we can resolve in a short amount of time in reaction to a process, but I certainly think it's warranted to look at, can the people in the district who are being asked to pay to have that recall question have some skin in the game? And so I just wouldn't want it to come from other people's priorities, work that's gone on for years, benefits that have been accruing because people have been at their community councils begging for parks, etc. But if it were part of the question, I think it would be fair. I don't know if it's legal, but that's another question for another day.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I'll just note that that is one of the many items we have on the follow-up list. Ms. Allard?
Thank you. Your goodness, I actually agree with you, Mr. Constant. So I would support that, if we could, that the district does pay for it. And I say that because nobody else signed the recall petition but people within that district. And to unfairly burden the rest of the municipality is unfair, fiscally unfair, because it takes from other districts that we want more money in our districts and we're all fighting for it all the time. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so my question is that this recall has already been certified by the court. And so if we did change that would probably be for future recalls. That wouldn't be for this particular recall. Is that correct? Maybe Mr. Gates could answer that.
Mr. Gates?
Yes.
Yes.
I would strongly advise against trying to change anything.
All right. Okay, thank you.
I think we almost all agree.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Mr. Gates.
On the record.
Okay. Okay, so, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you. Just I gotta say one more thing. So while I appreciate the comments from 3 of my colleagues, and this is gonna sound so weird coming from me, but I really do have a worry about the chilling effect that it might have on people who legitimately want to recall someone for legitimate reasons, that now they're going to have to pay for it through some type of property tax increase. So I just want to put that on the record, that as much as I do not like this process and have had to live through this process, I worry about that type of chilling effect. And for me, the prime solution, if we really want a solution, would be to ask the legislature to do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Constant?
And I would just add, in true Alaskan fashion, in this way, people are always passing off the expenses to the other guy. And I am paying for this recall. We are all paying for this recall, and it isn't the business of my district. And so I think this is a conversation we should walk through robustly on its own merits at another day. But, I mean, the sponsors and signatories of this document have shared their will onto me against my will. And I don't have a choice in that, but if they knew they had to pay for it, they might make a different choice. And I agree with your sentiment that the legislature needs to take care of this clear challenge, but they won't until one of them faces the same problem, because we know they're reactionary if nothing else.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Is there any further discussion before we vote on AR 2021-279? Okay, seeing no other members in the queue, members may proceed to vote on AR 2021-279 as amended. Madam Clerk, would you conduct the vote, please?
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Ms. Allard?
Yeah.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
Yes?
Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Perez-Padilla?
Yes.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
That motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones? Yes, go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you very much. I can't tell the assembly how grateful I am that you listen to me and that you respect what I'm telling you. I realize this is not ideal for some of you, but I do want to tell you thank you for listening and compromising, and that the clerk's office will continue to produce positively deviant results for you. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
have a
Jones.
question for Ms. Jones.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Can you define that term for us?
Positively deviant
Yes,
results.
thank you.
It means that we have this tiny little staff and we don't make mistakes. You get documents, hundreds of documents every week or every meeting that we produce. We file those documents, they're stamped, approved, or reconsidered, or whatever. The minutes that you get, John Weddleton is the only one that finds the errors on them. But years of minutes, they are awesome, they are accurate. We keep an index, we keep the public portal now, we schedule your meetings. We do this, it's so amazing. Our staff is amazing. We did a runoff, an election and a runoff election. We've done a 2-card ballot election. We do really, it's positively deviant because it is very few people, but they all do fabulous work. Look at what Mandy did with the marijuana stuff today. She allowed your constituents and businesses to keep operating because she was proactive and got that info before you. So that's it.
Thank you. I haven't heard that term before.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Ms. Jones, and thank you for what you do and all the members of your team. It's truly remarkable. We're grateful. I'm grateful. That brings us to the audience participation section of the meeting. Mr. Haberman, please identify yourself for the record. You will have 3 minutes. I'm going to start the timer now.
My name is Eugene Todd Haberman. I represent myself. I follow the public process, and the public process is done appropriately. Decision made by the governing body, more like in public interest. I'm sorry Michelle is leaving. I wish she would hear these comments. I came back into the picture in 2012, full-time, with an election where more than 40% of the police ran out of ballots, even though they ran out. There were 3 certifications of an election. You think you would get, not getting worse. It sure has. The situation where I heard today is appalling. The city of Anchorage moved into the election business. What I mean by election business, involved with other cities' elections. That needs to stop right now, today. You saw the complications of the involvement of dealing with a Juneau election. For the sake of those people in Juneau, their election needs to stay in Juneau and to be operated there, not in the municipality of Anchorage. I also remember the solicitation of bringing in the Metro Borough and have their elections being done here. Excuse me, where do you think the public's going to be confident in this scenario? They're not. This is more of the same. Now, with all due respect, you saw the scenario of saying you have to make choices because of the schedule conflicts and allow the municipal clerk to deal with the election and make sure everything works right. But the conflict we're hearing is the Juneau election. And then you also heard the need of costs and saying need of more personnel costs because of the scenario. When you're going after certain segments of the population of Assembly members and saying that they should pay for their particular recall, whatever, and not the other, think about what those costs are happening with Juneau's election being handled in Anchorage. We need to stop it now. What this clearly shows is totally out of line in doing elections. Nationwide, is there anywhere else in the country that the machinery of a city is being used to deal with accountability of elections outside of for another city? Is there anyone? I asked that question. How this started? I came to hear about it after the fact because I'm very closely connected to attending the Semi-Ethics Election Committee until for the years, but this slid away. And who approved this scenario of allowing Anchorage to be dealing with other communities' elections? It's got to stop right now. If you don't stop it, where are you going to get the confidence of elections and the validity of elections? Thank you. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Are there any other members of the public who would like to participate? Please come forward. And if you would state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm Karen Barnard. I've been to an assembly meeting for a while because of the pandemic, and I'm happy to see it's still an exciting venue. And I'd like to see the city require masks because I want to see the children stay in school. Doctors are not allowed in the operating room without a mask. We are required to wear seatbelts to keep us all safe, have vaccinations to get into school. So I really share a sentiment with many residents of Anchorage that we're tired of the politicization. The curve is going up. I'm a mathematician because we're not wearing these. And I don't think anybody has the right to balloon their bodily aspirations from their lungs onto me. And I designed this one so I could have a washable protection, and it doesn't impede my voice. I can speak very clearly. I'm not all muffled with the mask on there. Now, I'm a clothing designer, and I've tried to get my designs sown here in Anchorage because I don't want to go to China. Without the school district requiring or allowing to have things like shop and sewing, I have nobody to sew these. And the other part is the landlords, we need to require landlords to accept COVID relief money. I know a single mother who had to leave her apartment because she didn't know about these funds. Also for the vouchers, they have a bad name associated, which is not deserved. HUD money, the tenants who receive HUD money are no more bad than tenants who are self-pay. And that needs to stop. And Anchorage needs to require that, given all things about a tenant, you know, if they have a good history, that their voucher be accepted. Victims of domestic violence, victims of crime, the homeless due to illness, addiction, jobs, they need a fair chance. I know a man who is a felonist. He had a devil of a time getting housing, but once he got his voucher, nobody would rent to him. So this has got to stop. They deserve a chance, especially the parents with babies. We also have a Protect the PERT program here in the state of Alaska. I'm a mathematician. I have friends that are from the Awake Shelter, and I discovered they could not get attorneys. They were expected to go traumatized up against the PERT and win a long-term domestic violence protection order. I went and found out, okay, I'm numbers girl. The attorneys, public attorneys.
And ma'am, if you could wrap it up.
Yeah, the public attorneys for criminals, there's like 82 of them in Anchorage. I know it's state funded. There's 2 for the Council on Domestic Violence. That is discriminatory. It needs to be fixed. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. Are there any other members of the public who would like to participate? Okay, seeing no one else, we'll go ahead to member comments. And I just want to mention, because I forgot to mention this when we had the resolution pertaining to September 11 before us, the reason why we had it on today's agenda is because we don't meet as a body until September 14th, unless we have a special meeting next week, which is a possibility. Just a heads up. So we'll go to members on the phone if you have any comments, starting with Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No additional comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Madam Chair, he's no longer on the line.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
None for me, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. Mr. Weddleton?
No comment.
Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No comment.
Ms. Allard? Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, no comment.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No comment.
Mr. Constant?
Only that it was brought to my attention that there is an assembly meeting scheduled for the 26th, and it's likely that that meeting will be changed so that the election that happens on the 26th, the clerk staff could be completely in place. And so the standard in the past is that it's the next day, Wednesday. So just stay tuned and know that there's a slight schedule change probably coming.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. And thank you all for being here today. Have a safe and relaxing weekend. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Do we have a work session?